Hello bros, I'm Uncle Pacific Zero, Bro 5 Production, and the next part of Minecraft Lord Rings mod. So, we are actually going into Middle Earth this time. I just thought of something to have an easier time actually getting into the portal. We should actually go and grab a few blocks to just make it easier to get into the portal when we spawned in. Okay, it's raining, whatever. So, now we're actually going into the Lord of the Rings mod. I even asked the creator of the audiobooks I gonna use if it was okay I use them. He didn't answer. I know he read them, but he didn't answer, so... Well, I just say, screw him. I gonna use it because he didn't say yes or no, which I take that hell yes. I have no idea where that's on this. I'm actually gonna bring the stone cutter with me. That could be useful. I don't have any mana in here. No, only cobalt. Okay, so... Alright, so... He didn't say yes or no, so I'm gonna definitely have the audiobook in the background. Now, so we can follow the fellowship as good as possible. We're gonna do it straight off the bat, you say? Oh yeah, I came here actually for getting some blocks so I could actually get into the portal. I actually do want some polished blackstone with not a lot of polished blackstone stairs, but let's just make some more. That should be enough, as far as I know. So, we're gonna go into the portal, head into Middle Earth, see what happens, and probably get massacred by orcs in the first 5 minutes. That is actually a possibility, but I don't think that's really something we do actually have to worry about. Because as the Lord of the Rings mod is, you are actually able to do sidings. You can either fight the elves, humans, dwarves and such, or you can fight the orcs, Urukai and everything else that's evil. You are actually having to decide who you gonna side with. Considering you're gonna have to choose who to side with, we're gonna side with the elves. And there is the portal. Alright, so first things first, make sure we can get into the portal. Because if we can't get into it, what's the point of even going there? Alright, so considering also what we have to deal with, I gonna have everything I don't feel that I need directly there. So, alright, time to go. And so of course, I have my horse with me. Ow. There, now it's gone, and now we're going to. And as we are there,
There was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. The riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels stuffed with treasure.
I have no idea what Bag End is.
And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. At 90, he was as much the same as 50. At 99, they began to call him well-preserved, but unchanged would have been near the mark. There were some that shook their heads and thought this was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess apparently perpetual youth, as well as reputedly inexhaustible wealth.
"It will have to be paid for," they said. "It isn't natural, and trouble will come out of it."
But so far trouble had not come. And as Mr. Baggins was generous with his money, most people were willing to forgive him his oddities and his good fortune. He remained on visiting terms with his relatives, except, of course, the Sackville Bagginses.
Welcome to the Shire.
And he had many devoted admirers among the hobbits of poor and unimportant families. But he had no close friends.
This is what we have
some
as
of
the
his
world
younger
right
cousins
now.
began to grow up.
See,
The youngest of these, and Bilbo's
see.
favourite, was young Frodo Baggins. When Bilbo was 99, he adopted Frodo as his heir, and brought him to live at Bag End. And the hopes of the Sackville Bagginses were finally dashed.
I have no idea.
Bilbo and Frodo happened to have the same birthday.
Actually, I also
September
figured out something
22nd.
that was a bad thing.
You had better come and live here, Frodo, my lad,
Okay, now
said
I have to
Bilbo
find
one
the
day.
portal again.
And then we can celebrate our birthday parties comfortably together. At that time, Frodo was still in his tweens, as the hobbits called the irresponsible 20s between childhood and coming of age at 33. 12 more years passed. Each year the Bagginses had given very lively combined birthday parties at Bag End, but now it was understood that something quite exceptional was being planned for that autumn.
I need to find the portal. Otherwise I
Bilbo
would
was
never
going to be
be able
11
get back
to
to the
1.
world.
111,
At least not
a rather
before we had
curious
played
number,
at least
and a
100
very
hours.
respectable age for a
Right,
hobbit.
it's over there.
The old Duke himself had only reached 130. And Frodo was going to be 33. An important number, the date of his coming of age. Tongues began to wag in Hobbiton and Bywater, and rumour of the coming event travelled all over the Shire. The history and character of Mr. Bilbo Baggins became once again the chief topic of conversation, and the older folk suddenly found their reminiscences in welcome demand. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as the Gaffer. He held forth at the Ivy Bush, a small inn on the Bywater Road, and he spoke with some authority, for he had tended the garden at Bag End for 40 years, and had helped old Holman in the same job before that. Now that he was himself growing old and stiff at the joints, the job was primarily carried on by his youngest son, Sam Gamgee. Both father and son were on friendly terms with Bilbo and Frodo. They lived on the hill itself, in number 3 Bagshot Row, just below Bag End.
"A very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo, as I've always said,"
the Gaffer declared, with perfect truth, for Bilbo was very polite to him, calling him Master Hamfast and consulting him constantly upon the growing of vegetables, in the matter of roots,
Alright.
especially potatoes.
Redbird,
The Gaffer
let's
was
see.
recognized as the leading authority by all in the
I
neighbourhood.
know the potatoes
Including
is second
himself.
to only Big Gamble.
"But what about this Frodo that lives with him?"
Where are you going?
Asked old Noakes of Bywater.
Not leave me.
"Baggins is his name, but he's more than half a brandybuck, they say."
He beats me why any Baggins of Hobbiton should go looking for a wife away there in Buplin, where folks are so queer,
"And no wonder they're queer.
put in Daddy Two-Foot, the Gaffer's next-door neighbour.
If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River and right agin the old forest, that's a dark place if half the tales be true."
You're right, Dad, said the Gaffer.
Not that the Bandybucks of Buckland live in the old forest, but they're a queer breed, seemingly. They fool around with boats on that big river, and it isn't natural. Small wonder trouble came of it, I say. But be that as it may, Mr. Frodo is as nice a young hobbit as you could wish to meet. very much like Mr. Bilbo, and in more than looks. After all, his father was a Baggins. A decent, respectable hobbit was Mr. Drogo Baggins. There was never much to tell of him, till he was drowned.
Yeah, over there. You see a
Said several voices.
I'm not gonna grab
They
that
had heard
because
this
I'm
in
not
other
really
darker rumors
into the
before,
hobbit
of course.
crafting. I'm more into
But
the elven
hobbits have a
crafting. I
passion
know
for family
most-
history, and
most
they
of
were
the
ready to
crafting
hear it again.
Too bad they didn't
Well,
add
so
into
they
the
say,
bows.
said the gaffer.
But if they do actually
You
get
see,
an update where
Mr.
they actually
Drogo,
add the bows,
He
I
married poor
will
Miss Primula Brandybuck.
do that. And
She
take
was
the
our Mr.
consequences.
Bilbo's first cousin on the mother's side, her mother being the youngest of the old Duke's daughters, and Mr. Drogo was his second cousin. So Mr. Frodo is his first and second cousin once removed either way, as the saying is, if you follow me. And Mr. Drogo was staying at Brandy Hall with his father-in-law, old Master Gorbadoc, as he often did after his marriage, him being partial to his victuals, and old Gorbadoc keeping a mighty generous table. And he went out boating on the Brandywine River, and he and his wife were drowned. And poor Mr. Frodo, only a child. I heard they went on the water after dinner in the moonlight. And it was Drogo's weight that sunk the boat. And I heard he pushed him in. And he pulled her in after.
Said Sandyman, the Hobbiton miller.
You shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandyman.
Said the gaffer, who did not much like the miller.
There is no call to go talking of pushing and pulling. Boats are quite tricky enough for those that sit still out looking further for the coast trouble.
Still have not gotten anywhere.
Anyway, there was this Mr.
It's a
Frodo
very
left an
big
orphan
world.
and stranded, as you might say,
This dimension.
among those queer buttlanders being brought up anyhow in Brandy Hole. A regular warren by all accounts. Old Master Gorbadoc never had fewer than a couple of hundred relations in the place. Mr. Bilbo never did a kinder deed than when he brought the lad back to live among decent folk. But I reckon it was a nasty shock for those Sackville Bagginses. They thought they were gonna get back in that time when he went off and thought to be dead. And then he comes back and orders them off. And he goes on living and never looking a day older, bless him. And suddenly he produces an heir. And has all the papers made out proper. The Sackville Bagginses won't never see the inside of Baggin now. Or it is to be hoped not. There's a tidy bit of money tucked away up there, I hear tell.
Said a stranger, a visitor on business from Mickle Delving in the Westfarthing.
All the top of your hill is full of tunnels packed with chests of gold and silver and jewels, by what I've heard.
And you've heard more than I can speak to,
Answered the gaffer.
I know nothing about jewels. Mr. Bilbo's free with his money, and there seems no lack of it, but I know of no tunnel making. I saw Mr. Bilbo here. He came back a matter of 60 years ago when I was a lad. I'd not long come prentice to old Holborn, him being my dad's cousin, but he had me up at Bag End, helping him to keep folks from trampling and traipsing all over the garden while the sale was on. And in the middle of it all, Mr. Bilbo comes up the hill with a pony and some mighty big bags of a couple of chests. I don't doubt they were mostly full of treasure he had picked up in foreign parts, where there be mountains of gold, they say, but there wasn't enough to fill tunnels. But my lad Sam will know more about that. He's in and out of Bag End. Crazy about stories of the old days he is, and he listens to all of Mr. Bilbo's tales. Mr. Bilbo has learned him his letters, meaning no harm, mind you, and I hope no harm will come of it. Elves and dragons, I says to him, carrots and potatoes are better for me and you. Don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble too big for you, I says to him. And I might say it to others,
He added with a look at the stranger and the miller. But the gaffer did not convince his audience. The legend of Bilbo's wealth was now too firmly fixed in their minds of the younger generation of hobbits.
Ah, but he has likely enough been adding to what he brought at first.
Argued the miller, voicing common opinion.
He's often away from home. And look at the outlandish folk that visit him. Dwarves coming at night, and that old wandering conjurer Gandalf and all. You can say what you like, Gaffer, but Bag End's a queer place, and its folk are queerer. And you can say what you like about what you know no more than you do of boating, Mr. Sandeman.
Reported the gaffer, disliking the
Why
miller
do
even
you
more
always
than
get some
usual.
white suddenly?
If that's being queer, then we could do with a bit more queerness in these parts. There's some not far away that wouldn't offer up pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole with golden walls. But they do things proper at Bag End. Our Sam says that everyone's gonna be invited to the party. And there's gonna be presents, mark you, presents for all. This very month, that is.
That very month was September, and as fine as you could ask. A day or two later, a rumour, probably started by the knowledgeable Sam, was spread about that there were going to be fireworks. Fireworks! What is more, such as had not been seen in the Shire for nigh on a century. Not indeed since the old Duke
Okay, this
died.
ring's sort of good at annoying.
Days passed, and the day drew
I don't want to
nearer.
look in the background. I don't have to
An
park
odd-looking
much.
wagon laden with
Like, I
odd-looking
focus
packages
on
rolled into
my
Hobbiton one
quest at
evening
hand.
and toiled up the
But
hill
we
to Bag
haven't
End.
been going a long
The startled
way
hobbits
now,
peered out
and
of
we
lamplit
still have
doors to
not
gape
even
at it.
gotten like a building
It
yet.
was driven by outlandish folk, singing strange songs. Dwarves with long beards and deep hoods.
Let's just say,
A
where
few
I'm
of them
planning
remained
to
at Bag
work,
End.
I think it's just about
At the end of
here
the second week
where
in
I'm
September, a
planning
cart
to
came
set
in
up
through
base.
Bywater from the direction
yeah,
of the
we are
Brandywine
on
Bridge in
our
broad
way
daylight.
The funny thing is
An
that
old man was driving it all
at
alone.
the point
He
where
wore a
the
tall, pointed blue
fellowship
hat,
actually will pass
a long grey
later
cloak,
on in the story.
and a silver scarf. He had a long
No, I
white
mean,
beard
we are
and bushy
just in the
eyebrows that stuck out beyond the
first
brim of his hat.
chapter.
Small hobbit children ran after the cart all through
Expected
Hobbiton
pop.
and right up the hill. It had a cargo of fireworks, as they rightly guessed.
I mean, if it wasn't so
Wilbur's
much
front door, the
dialogue, you
old
could
man began
almost
to
think it
unload.
was a movie. Because
There were great
the
bundles of
audiobook is
fireworks
well
of
done,
all
but I
sorts
will
and
not do a
shapes,
shout out
each
to the one
labelled
that
with a large
rated it
red
because
Theonorian
he
G
read my
and
message,
the elf
did
rune
not
G.
answer, did not
That
care
was
to
Gandalf's
answer,
mark, of
so he
course.
doesn't even get a shout
And
out.
the old man was Gandalf the
It's a
Wizard,
fitting
whose
punishment.
fame in the Shire was due mainly to his skill with fires, smokes, and lights.
I mean, I paid attention
His
to the
real
audiobook,
business
so
was far
well,
more difficult and
I have
dangerous.
no reason
But the
to give
Shire
a
folk
shout
knew nothing
out
about
to
it.
him because I
To
do
them, he
own
was
the
just one of the
rights.
attractions of the party.
And it's 10
Hence the
years old,
excitement
so
of the
I do
Hobbit
not
children.
think he actually had
Gee
much
for
say in
grand, they
that.
shouted, and the old man smiled. They knew him by sight, though he only appeared in Hobbiton occasionally
That
and
is
never
sad
stopped
that
long.
they created
But neither
this
they
series
nor
of
any but the
like-
oldest of the elders
Because
had seen
it's
one
so
of his firework
bad.
displays. They now belonged to the legendary past. When the old man, helped by Bilbo and some dwarves, had finished unloading, Bilbo gave a few pennies away, but not a single squib or cracker was forthcoming, to the disappointment of the onlookers.
Run away now.
Said Gandalf.
Oh, you will get plenty when the time comes.
Then he disappeared inside with Bilbo, and the door was shut. The young hobbit stared at the door in vain for a while, and then made off, feeling that the day of the party would never come. Inside Bag End, Bilbo and Gandalf were sitting at an open window of a small room looking out west onto the garden. The late afternoon was bright and peaceful. The flowers glowed red and golden. Snapdragons and sunflowers and
I got a pair.
nasturtiums trailing all over the turf walls and peeping in at the round windows.
How bright your garden looks.
Said Gandalf. Yes, said Bilbo. I am very fond indeed of it. And of all the dear old Shire.
Let's check the factions. Let's.
But I think I need a
this was-
holiday.
Yeah, here.
So you mean to go on with your plan then?
Lothlorien.
I do.
That's a faction
I
I'm
made up
gonna
my mind months
side
ago,
with,
and
but as
I
you can
haven't
see,
changed it.
I'm a stranger right now.
Very well. It is no good saying any more. Stick to your plan. Your whole plan, mind you. And I hope it will turn out for the best. For you, and for all of us.
I hope so. Anyway, I mean to enjoy myself on Thursday and have my little joke.
I could actually tell
Who will
you
laugh, I
exactly
wonder.
where I want to put up base,
Said Gandalf,
but I
shaking
will
his head.
try to not use
Oh, we
teleportation
shall
too
see.
much. Only
The
for
next day, more
some
carts rolled
things
up the
I
hill.
need.
And
Like,
still more
if I need to
carts.
find lava,
There might
that
have been some
is
grumbling
pretty hard
about
to actually
dealing
find.
locally.
I will
But that
find
very
it
week,
and
orders
teleport
began to
where
pour
I
out
know
of
there
Bag End
is
for
lava.
every kind of provision,
And
commodity,
like
or
sand,
luxury
it's
that could be
only
obtained in
near
Hobbiton or
Harad,
Bywater, or
those
anywhere in the
actually
neighborhood.
is.
People
And
became enthusiastic.
yeah, I'm not gonna
And began to
walk
tick
all
off the
way
days of the
over to near
calendar.
Harad. That's
And they
is
watched
a
eagerly for the
long
postman,
walk from
hoping
where
for
I'm planning to
invitations.
set up base.
Before long, the invitations began pouring out. and the Hobbiton post office was blocked, and the Bywater post office was snowed under, and voluntary assistant postmen were called for. There was a constant stream of them going up the hill, carrying hundreds of polite variations on "Thank you, I shall certainly come." A notice appeared on the gate at Bag End. "No admittance except on party business." Even those who had or pretended to have party business were seldom allowed inside. Bilbo was busy, writing invitations, ticking off answers, packing up presents, and making some private preparations of his own. From the time of Gandalf's arrival, he remained hidden from view.
How old is Lord of the Rings though?
One morning, the hobbits woke to find the large field south of Bilbo's front door
I mean, I
covered with
remember
ropes
it.
and poles of
I
tents and
watched it a
pavilions.
lot when I
A
was.
special entrance was cut into the bank leading to the road,
I
and wide steps and a large white gate were built there.
There were at that
The
time.
three hobbit
Of
families
course,
of
there was
Bagshot
Lord
Road,
of the
adjoining the
Rings,
field, were
the Two
intensely
Towers,
interested
and
and
the Return of the
generally
King.
envied.
I owned all
Old
three
Gaffer
of
Gamgee
those
stopped even pretending
by
to
the
work in his
time
garden. The tents
I
began to go up.
actually was 9
There was a
years
specially
old or
large
10 years
pavilion
old.
so big
I
that
know
the
I
tree
owned
that
them
grew in
all
the field was right inside
before
it,
I moved,
and stood proudly near one end,
for,
at the head
I mean,
of the
2
chief
hours
table.
away from where I usually
Lanterns
live.
were hung
That
on all
is
its
4,
branches.
and I know I owned
More
all of
promising
them
still,
at least
to
2
the
or
Hobbit's
3 years
mind,
before then.
an
I was
enormous open-air
14
kitchen
then,
was erected in the
so,
north corner
yeah.
of the field. A draught of cooks from every inn and eating house for miles around arrived to supplement the dwarf and other odd folk quartered at Bag End. Excitement rose to its height. Then the weather clouded over. That was on Wednesday,
But
the
if
eve
I'm
of
gonna
the
be
party.
honest, the audiobook
Anxiety
is
was intense.
100 times better than the movies.
Then,
There's
Thursday,
a lot of things
September
missing
the
in the movies.
22nd,
Even with
actually
the
dawned.
cut scenes, it's still
The
a
sun
lot of
got
things
up.
missing.
The clouds vanished,
And they
flags were
changed
unfurled,
a little bit
and the
too
fun
much.
began. Bilbo Baggins called it a party, but it was really a variety of entertainments rolled into one. Practically everybody living near was invited. A very few were overlooked by accident, but as they turned up all the same, that did not matter. Many people from other parts of the Shire were also asked, and there were even a few from outside the borders.
Oh, wait, no,
Bilbo
not
met the
been
guests, in addition
Wait,
at
what?
the new White Gate in person. He gave away presents to all and sundry. The latter were those who went out again by a back way and came in again by the gate.
I've
Hobbits
been
give
heading the
presents to
wrong way,
other
haven't
people on
I?
their own birthdays. Not very expensive ones as a rule,
I
and
think
not
I've
so
been heading
lavishly
the
as on
wrong
this
way.
occasion. But it was not a bad system. Actually, in Hobbiton and Bywater, every day in the year was somebody's birthday, so that every hobbit in those parts had a fair chance of at least one present
Well.
at least once a week.
I
But they
expected that.
never got tired of them. On this occasion, the presents were unusually good. The hobbit children were so excited that for a while they almost forgot about eating. There were toys the like of which they had never seen before. All beautiful, and some obviously magical. Many of them had indeed been ordered a year before, and had come all the way from the mountain, and from
I
Dale,
was heading the wrong
and were of
way.
real dwarf make.
Okay, I
When every
need to
guest
find
had
my
been
horse
welcomed
again.
and was finally inside the gate, there were songs, dances, music, games,
Okay,
and
let's
of course,
expect it.
food and drink. There were 3 official meals: lunch, tea, and dinner, or supper. But lunch and tea were marked chiefly by the fact that at those times all the guests were sitting down and eating together. At other times there were merely lots of people eating and drinking, continuously from 11 until 6:30, when the fireworks started. The fireworks were by Gandalf, and they were not only brought by him, but designed and made by him, and the special effects, set pieces, and flights of rockets were let off by him. But there was also a generous distribution of squids, crackers, bacca-rappers, sparklers, torches, dwarf candles, elf fountains, goblin barkers, and thunderclaps. They were
I
all
think I already passed
superb.
this.
The art of Gandalf improved
Yeah,
with
I already
age.
passed this. The reason is my horse is over
There
this
were
way.
rockets like a flight of scintillating birds singing in sweet voices.
Oh, it went the wrong way.
There were green
so,
trees
yeah.
with trunks of dark smoke, their leaves opened like a whole spring unfolding in a moment, and their shining branches dropped glowing flowers down upon the astonished hobbits, disappearing with the sweet scent just before they touched their upturned faces. There were fountains of butterflies that flew glittering into the trees. There were pillars of coloured fires that rose and turned into eagles, or sailing ships, or a phalanx of flying swans.
It
There
is
was a red
small chance of
thunderstorm and a
water
shower
right
of
above
yellow
the
rain.
dam.
There was a forest of silver spears that sprang suddenly into the air with a yell like an embattled army, and came down again into the water with a hiss like 100 hot snakes. And there was also one last surprise.
That's it!
In honor of Bilbo, and it startled the hobbits exceedingly, as Gandalf intended. The lights went out. A great smoke went up. It shaped itself like a mountain seen in the distance and began to glow at the summit.
North there. Right,
It
let's head
spouted
to
green
the
and
east.
scarlet flames.
I was accidentally
Out
heading to the
flew a
west,
red
which I
golden
was
dragon.
not intending.
Not life-size, but terribly lifelike. Fire came from its jaws. Its eyes glared down. There was a roar. And he whizzed 3 times over the heads of the crowd. They all ducked, and many fell flat on their faces. The dragon passed like an express train, turned a somersault, and burst over Bywater with a deafening explosion.
That is the signal for supper,
Said Bilbo.
Well, they're still
Pain
in
and alarm
the
vanished at once,
Shire,
and
so
prostrate
we
hobbits
do
leaped to
actually
their
have
feet.
the chance to get
There was a
back
splendid supper
to
for everyone.
we
For
actually,
everyone, that is,
it's
except
supposed
those
to be.
invited to the special family dinner party. This was held in the great pavilion with the tree. The invitations were limited to 12 dozen, a number also called by the hobbits 1 gross, though the word was not considered proper to use of people. And the guest was selected from all the families to which Bilbo and Frodo were related, with the addition of a few special unrelated friends, such as Gandalf. Many young hobbits were included, and present by parental permission, for hobbits were easygoing with their children in the matter of sitting up late, especially when there was a chance of getting them a free meal. Bringing up young hobbits took a lot of provender. There were many Bagginses and Boffins, and also many Dukes and Brandybucks. There were various Grubbs, relations of Bilbo Baggins' grandmother, and various Chubbs, connections of his Duke grandfather, and selections of Burrowses, Bolgers, Bracegirdles, Brockhouses, Goodbodies, Hornblowers, and Proudfoots. Some of these were only very distantly connected with Bilbo, and some of them had hardly ever been in Hobbiton before, as they lived in remote corners of the Shire.
Okay, Hobbiton. That's
The
where we're
Sackville
going.
Bagginses were not forgotten. Otho and his wife Lobelia were present. They disliked Bilbo and detested Frodo, but so magnificent was the invitation card written in golden ink that they had felt it was impossible to refuse. Besides, their cousin, Bilbo, had been specializing in food for many years, and his table had a high reputation. All the 144 guests expected a pleasant feast, though they rather dreaded the after-dinner speech of their host, an inevitable item. He was liable to drag in bits of what he called poetry, and sometimes, after a glass or two, would allude to the absurd adventures of his mysterious journey. The guests were not disappointed. They had a very pleasant feast, in fact an engrossing entertainment, rich, abundant, varied, and prolonged. The purchase of provisions fell almost to nothing throughout the district in ensuing weeks, but as Bilbo's catering had depleted the stocks of most stores, cellars, and warehouses for miles around, that did not matter much. After the feast, more or less, came the speech. Most of the company were, however, now in a torrent mood, at that delightful stage in which they called filling up the corners. They were sipping their favourite drinks and nibbling at their favourite dainties, and their fears were forgotten. They were prepared to listen to anything and to cheer at every full stop.
We at least have a time
My
to get to where
dear
we're supposed
people.
to be.
Began Bilbo
Each
announcing his
book
place.
of
Here,
is actually
here,
10
here,
hours long.
they shouted.
We have
They
like
kept on
30
repeating it in
hours, so
chorus,
that we have
seeming
to
reluctant to follow their own advice.
fellowship.
Bilbo left his place and went on and stood on a chair under the illuminated tree.
We're all allowed to do
The light
whatever
on the
we like.
lanterns fell on his beaming face. The golden buttons shone on his embroidered silk waistcoat. They could all see him standing, waving one hand in the air. The other was in his trouser pocket.
My dear Bagginses and Boffins,
He began again.
and my dear Dukes and Brandybucks, and Grubbs, and Chubbs, and Burrowses, and Hornblowers, and Bolgers, Bracegirdles, Goodbodies, Brockhouses, and Proudfoots.
shouted an elderly hobbit from the back of the pavilion.
I
His
wonder
name,
if
of
the
course,
audiobook
was
actually
Proudfoot,
is heard well on
and
the
well
stream.
merited. His feet
I
were
mean,
large,
I can't know.
exceptionally furry,
I
and
hear
both were
very
on the
well.
table,
Proudfoots.
repeated Bilbo.
Oh, so my good Sackville Bagginses that I welcome back at last to Bag End. Today is my 111th birthday. I am 11-1 today.
Hooray! Hooray! Many happy returns, they shouted, and they hammered joyously on the tables. Bilbo was doing splendidly. This was the sort of stuff they liked. Short and obvious.
I hope you're all enjoying yourselves as much as I am.
Deafening cheers, cries of yes and no, noises of trumpets and horns, pipes and flutes and other musical instruments. There were, as had been said, many young hobbits present. Hundreds of musical crackers had been pulled. Most of them bore the mark Dale on them, which did not convey much to most of the hobbits, but they all agreed they were marvellous crackers. They contained instruments, small but of perfect make and enchanting tones. Indeed, in one corner, some of the young Tukes and Brandybucks, supposing Uncle Bilbo to have finished, since he had plainly said all that was necessary, now got up an impromptu orchestra and began a merry dance tune. Master Everard Tuke and Miss Melilot Brandybuck got on a table and with bells in their hands began to dance the Springle Ring. A pretty dance, but rather vigorous. But Bilbo had not finished. Seizing a horn from a youngster nearby, he blew 3 loud hoots. The noise subsided.
I shall not keep you long.
He cried. Cheers from all the assembly.
I have called you all together for a purpose.
Something in the way that he said this made an impression. There was almost silence, and one of the two of the Tukes pricked up their ears.
Indeed, for 3 purposes. First of all, to tell you that I am immensely fond of you all, and that 11 years is too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable hobbits.
Tremendous outburst of approval.
I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve.
This was unexpected and rather difficult. There was some scattered clapping, but most of them were trying to work it out and see if it came to a compliment.
Secondly, to celebrate my birthday,
Cheers again.
I should say our birthday, for it is of course also the birthday of my heir and nephew Frodo. He comes of age and into his inheritance today.
Some perfunctory clapping by the elders, and some loud shouts of Frodo! Frodo! Jolly old Frodo from the juniors. The Sackville Bagginses scowled, and wondered what was meant by coming to his inheritance.
Together we score 144. Your numbers were chosen to fit this remarkable total. 1 gross, if I may use the expression.
No cheers. This was ridiculous. Many of his guests, and especially the Sackville Bagginses, were insulted, feeling sure they had only been asked to fill up the required number, like goods in a package.
1 gross indeed. Vulgar expression. Oh, it is also, if I may be allowed to refer to ancient history, the anniversary of my arrival by barrel at Esgaroth, on the Long Lake. Though the fact that it was my birthday slipped my memory on that occasion, I was only 51 then, and birthdays did not seem so important. The banquet was very splendid, however, though I had a bad cold at the time. I remember, and could only say, "Thank you very much." I now repeat it more correctly. Thank you very much for coming to my little party.
Obstinate silence. They all feared that a song or some poetry was now imminent, and they were getting bored. Why couldn't he stop talking and let them drink his health? But Bilbo did not sing or recite. He paused for a moment.
Thirdly, and finally,
He said.
I wish to make an announcement!
He spoke this last word so loudly and suddenly that everyone sat up who still could.
I regret to announce that, though, as I said, 11 years is far too short a time to spend among you. This is the end. I am going. I am leaving now. Goodbye.
He stepped down and vanished. There was a blinding flash of light, and the guests all blinked. When they opened their eyes, Bilbo was nowhere to be seen. 144 flabbergasted hobbits sat back speechless. Old Odo Proudfoot removed his feet from the table and stamped. Then there was a dead silence. But suddenly, after several deep breaths, every Baggins, Boffin, Duke, Brandybuck, Grubb, Chubb, Burrow, Bolger, Bracegirdle, Brockhouse, Goodbody, Hornblower, and Proudfoot began to talk all at once. It was generally agreed that the joke was in very bad taste, and more food and drink were needed to cure their guests of shock and annoyance.
He's mad, I always said so,
Was probably the most popular comment. Even the Dukes, with a few exceptions, thought Bilbo's behavior was absurd. For the moment, most of them took it for granted that his disappearance was nothing more than a ridiculous prank. But old Rory Brandybuck was not so sure. Neither age nor an enormous dinner had clouded his wits. And he said to his daughter-in-law, Esmeralda,
"There's something fishy in this, my dear. I believe that Mad Baggins is off again. Silly old fool. But why worry? He hasn't taken the victuals with him."
He called loudly to Frodo to send the wine round again. Frodo was the only one present who had said nothing. For some time he had sat silent beside Bilbo's empty chair and ignored all remarks and questions. He had enjoyed the joke, of course, even though he had been in the know. He had difficulty in keeping from laughter at the indignant surprise of the guests, but at the same time he felt deeply troubled. He realized suddenly that he loved the old hobbit dearly. Most of the guests went on eating and drinking and discussing Bilbo Baggins' oddities, past and present, but the Sackville Bagginses had already departed in wrath. Frodo did not want to have any more to do with the party. He gave orders for more wine to be served. Then he got up and drained his own glass silently to the health of Bilbo, and slipped out of the pavilion. As for Bilbo Baggins, even while he was making his speech, he had been fingering the golden ring in his pocket, his magic ring that he had kept secret for so many years. As he stepped down, he slipped it on his finger, and he was never seen by any hobbit in Hobbiton again. He walked briskly back to his hole, and stood for a moment listening with a smile to the din in the pavilion and to the sounds of merrymaking in other parts of the field. Then he went in. He took off his party clothes, folded up and wrapped in tissue paper his embroidered silk waistcoat, and put it away. Then he put on quickly some old untidy garments, and fastened round his waist a worn leather belt. On it he hung a short sword in a battered black leather scabbard. From a locked drawer, smelling of mothballs, he took out an old cloak and hood. They had been locked up as if they were very precious, but they were so patched and weather-stained that their original colour could hardly be guessed. It might have been dark green. They were rather too large for him. He then went into his study, and from a large strong box took out a bundle wrapped in old cloths, and a leather-bound manuscript, and also a large bulky envelope. The book and bundle he stuffed into the top of a heavy bag that was standing there already nearly full. Into the envelope he slipped his golden ring, and its fine chain, and then sealed it, and addressed it to Frodo. At first he put it on the mantelpiece, but suddenly he removed it and stuck it in his pocket. At that moment the door opened, and Gandalf came quickly in. "Hello," said Bilbo.
By Baywater.
I wondered if you would turn up,"
"I am glad to find you visible."
replied the wizard, sitting down in the chair.
"I wanted to catch you and have a few final words. I suppose you feel that everything has gone off splendidly and according to plan?"
Yes, I do," said Bilbo. "Though that flash was surprising. Quite startled me, let alone the others. A little addition of your own, I suppose?"
"It was.
Alright.
You have
Go
wisely
to
kept
Hobbiton.
that ring secret all these years, and it seemed to me necessary to give your guests something else that would seem to explain your sudden vanishment."
Yeah, no
That would
landmarks,
spoil my joke.
which is what we will create.
You are an
ourselves.
interfering old busybody.
Yes,
laughed
you have
Bilbo.
a lot you can do.
But I
Yeah,
expect you
Yes,
know
universe.
best,
And you can
as usual.
just do whatever
I do.
you like.
When I know anything.
You can
But I
remember
don't feel too sure about this whole affair.
landmarks just
It has now come
Anyway.
to the final point. You've
Is
had
this
your
your own
joke and
interpretation?
alarmed or offended most of your relations, and given the whole Shire something to talk about for 9 days, or 99 more likely. Are you going any further?
Yes, I am. I feel I need a holiday. A very long holiday, as I've told you before. Probably a permanent holiday. I don't expect I shall return. In fact, I don't mean to. And I have made all arrangements. I am old, Gandalf. I don't look it, but I am beginning to feel it in my heart of hearts. Well preserved indeed, he snorted. Why, I feel all thin, sort of stretched, if you know what I mean.
Alright.
Like
Now
butter
we are
that has
topic
been
now.
scraped over too much bread.
As you can see, there's
That
not
can't
really
be
anything.
right. I need a change or something. Gandalf looked curiously and closely at him.
No, it does not seem right, he said thoughtfully. No, after all, I believe your plan is probably the best.
Well, I've made up my mind anyway. I want to see mountains again, Gandalf.
Now,
Mountains!
Go back and
And then
head to
find
veranda
somewhere where I
1
can
three.
rest. In peace and quiet. Without a lot of relatives
But there's
prying
not a lot
around
to
and a
do in the
string of
Shire.
confounded
It
visitors
is
hanging on the
safe, though.
bell.
There's no
I might find somewhere where I can finish my
no
book.
dark
I have thought of a nice ending for it.
dark characters that was spawned.
And he lived
so
happily ever after,
they're
to the
only
end of his
the
days.
hobbits.
Gandalf laughed. And I hope he will. But nobody will read the book however it ends.
Oh, they may in years to come. Frodo has read some already as far as it has gone. You will keep an eye on Frodo, won't you?
Yes, I will. 2 eyes, as often as I can spare them.
He would come with me, of course, if I asked him. In fact, he offered to once, just before the party. But he does not really want to yet. I want to see the wild country again before I die, and the mountains. But he is still in love with the Shire, with woods and fields and little rivers. He ought to be comfortable here. I am leaving everything to him. Of course, except a few oddments. I hope he will be happy when he gets used to being on his own. It's time he was his own master now.
Everything, said Gandalf. The ring as well. You agreed to that, you remember?
Well, yes, I suppose so, stammered
You're
Bilbo.
gonna need to find Ethelred
Where
later
is it?
on.
In an envelope, if you must know, said Bilbo impatiently. There, on the mantelpiece. Well, no. Here it is in my pocket. He hesitated. Isn't that odd now? He said softly to himself. Yet after all, why not? Why shouldn't it stay here? Gandalf looked again very hard at Bilbo, and there was a gleam in his eyes.
I think, Bilbo, he said quietly, I should leave it behind. Don't you want to?
Well, yes.
I think you're actually gonna take a detour later on.
Now it
Go
comes
on
to
and
it.
check out Scare.
I don't feel like parting with it at all, I may say. And I don't really see why I should. Why do you want me to? He asked, and a curious change came over his voice. It was sharp with suspicion and annoyance. You are always badgering me about my ring, but you have never bothered me about any other things that I've got on my journey.
No, but I had to badger you, said Gandalf. I wanted the truth. It was important. Magic rings are, well, magical, and they are rare and curious. I was professionally interested in your ring, you may say, and I still am. I should like to know where it is if you go wandering again. Also, I think you have had it quite long enough. You won't need it anymore, Bilbo, unless I am quite mistaken.
Bilbo flushed, and there was an angry light in his eyes. His kindly face grew hard. Why not? He cried. And what business it is of yours anyway to know what I do with my own things? It is my own. I found it. It came to me.
Yes, yes, said Gandalf. There is no need to get angry.
If I am, it is your fault, said Bilbo. It is mine, I tell you. My own. My precious? Yes, my precious. The wizard's face remained grave and attentive, and
remember
only a
when
flicker
he
in his
tried to
deep
take
eyes
the
showed
ring
that he
from
was
Frodo
startled and indeed alarmed.
Rivendell. That is
It
the
has been
most
called that
scary
before,
moment of the
he said.
entire game.
But
I
not
mean,
by
the entire
you.
movie.
But I say it now, and why not?
Well,
Even if
movies.
Gollum said the same once,
But
it's
that
not his
face,
now, but mine. And I shall
is
keep it, I
not
say.
something
Gandalf
any
stood up and he
living
spoke
being should
sternly.
have.
You will be a fool if you do, Bilbo.
He said,
You make that clearer with every word you say. It has got far too much hold on you. Let it go, and then you can go yourself and be free.
Huh, you don't realize that actually.
I'll do as I choose and go as I please.
said Bilbo obstinately.
Now, my dear hobbit,
Said Gandalf.
all your long life we've been friends, and you owe me something. Come, do as you promised. Give it up.
Well, if you want my ring yourself, say so.
Cried Bilbo.
But you won't get it. I won't give my precious away, I tell you.
His hand strayed to the hilt of his small sword. Gandalf's eyes flashed.
It will be my turn to get angry soon.
He said,
If you say that again, I shall. Then you will see Gandalf the Grey uncloaked.
He took a step towards the hobbit, and he seemed to grow tall and menacing. His shadow filled the little room. Bilbo backed away to the wall, breathing hard, his hand clutching at his pocket. They stood for a while, facing one another, and the air of the room tingled. Gandalf's eyes remained bent on the hobbit. Slowly his hands relaxed, and he began to tremble. I don't know what has come over you, Gandalf. You were never like this before. What is it all about? It's mine, isn't it? I found it, and Gollum would have killed me if I hadn't kept it. I'm not a thief, whatever he said.
I have never called you one,
Gandalf answered.
and I am not one either. I am not trying to rob you, but to help you. I wish you would trust me as you used.
He turned away, and the shadow passed. He seemed to dwindle again to an old grey man, bent and troubled. Bilbo drew his hand over his eyes. I am sorry, he said. But I felt so queer. And yet it would be a relief in a way not to be bothered with it anymore. It has been so growing on my mind lately. Sometimes I felt like it was an eye looking at me. And I'm always wanting to put it on and disappear, don't you know? Or wondering if it is safe.
Scary, eh?
And pulling it out to make sure. I tried looking it up, but I found I couldn't rest without it in my pocket.
I haven't really checked it.
I don't know why. And I don't seem to be able to make up my mind.
Then trust mine, said Gandalf. It is quite made up. Go away and leave it behind.
Look at this skybox.
Stop possessing it.
It's
Give it to
so
Frodo,
beautiful.
and I will look after him.
And the moon is actually
Bilbo stood
more
for a moment, tense and
circular
undecided.
than
Presently he sighed.
Minecraft's moon.
All right, he said with an effort.
I love the skybox of
I will.
nighttime.
Then he shrugged his shoulders and smiled rather ruefully. After all, this is what this party business was all about, really. To give away lots of birthday presents and somehow make it easier to give it away at the same time.
Oh,
It
this
hasn't
is a
made it any
big
easier in
bridge.
the end, but it would be a pity to waste all my preparations. It would quite spoil the joke.
Indeed, it would take away the only point I ever saw in the affair,
Said Gandalf. Very well, said Bilbo. It goes to Frodo with all the rest. He drew a deep breath. And now, I really must be starting, or someone else will catch me. I have said goodbye, and I couldn't bear to do it all over again. He picked up his bag and moved to the door.
You still have got the ring in your pocket,
Said the wizard. Well, so I have, cried Bilbo. And my will and the other documents too. You had better take it and deliver it for me. That will be safest.
No, don't give the ring to me, said Gandalf. Put it on the mantelpiece. It will be safe enough there until Frodo comes. I shall wait for him.
Bilbo took out the envelope, but just as he was about to set it by the clock, his hand jerked back, and the packet fell on the floor. Before he could pick it up, the wizard stooped and seized it and set it in its place. A spasm of anger passed swiftly over the hobbit's face again. Suddenly it gave way to a look of relief and a laugh. Well, that's That's that, he said. Now, I'm off. They went out into the hall. Bilbo chose his favourite stick from the stand, and then he whistled. 3 dwarves came out of different rooms where they had been busy. Is everything ready? Answered Bilbo. Everything packed and labelled?
Everything.
They answered. Well, let's start then.
I mean, it's
He stepped out
very
of the front
apparent
door.
already that
It was a fine
there
night,
are
and the black
very
sky
big
was dotted with
difference
stars.
from the movies to the
He
audiobooks.
looked up, sniffing the air.
If you can get your hands on the audiobook, do it.
What
They're
fun!
so much
What
better.
fun to be off again, off on the road with dwarves.
I mean,
This is what
the
I've
third
really
time
been
I
longing
listened to the
for
entire story.
years. Goodbye, he said, looking
This
at his
time,
old
though, I'm
home
not
and bowing
alone.
to the door.
Hopefully not forever, at least.
Goodbye,
I mean, I'm
Gandalf.
not,
Goodbye for the present,
the only
Bilbo.
one here.
Take care of yourself. You are old enough, and perhaps wise enough.
Take care. I don't care. Don't you worry about me. I'm as happy now as I've ever been, and that is saying a great deal. But the time has come. I am being swept off my feet at last, he added, and then in a low voice, as if to himself, he sang softly in the dark. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can,
I don't see anything that seems
pursuing it
scary.
with eager feet, until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then I cannot say. He paused, silent for a moment. Then, without another word, he turned away from the lights and the voices in the fields and tents, and followed by his 3 companions, went round into his garden, and trotted down the long sloping path. He jumped over a low place in the hedge at the bottom, and took to the meadows, passing into the night like a rustle of wind in the grass. Gandalf remained for a while staring after him into the darkness.
Goodbye, my dear Bilbo.
It's actually almost 2
Until
a.m.
our
at
next
night
meeting.
for me right now.
He said softly, and went back indoors. Frodo came in soon afterwards, and found him sitting in the dark, deep in thought. Has he gone? He asked.
Yes,
Answered Gandalf.
he has gone at last.
I hoped until this evening that it was only a joke, said Frodo. But I knew in my heart that he really meant to go. He always used to joke about serious things. I wish I had come back sooner, just to see him off,
I think really he preferred slipping off quietly in the end,
said Gandalf.
Don't be too troubled. You'll be all right. Ah, you left a packet for you. There it is.
Frodo took the envelope from the mantelpiece and glanced at it, but did not open it.
You'll find his will and all other documents in there, I think,
Said the wizard.
You are the master of Bag End now. And also, I fancy you'll find a golden ring.
The ring! Exclaimed Frodo. Has he left me that? I wonder why. Still, may be useful,
It may be, and it may not,
said Gandalf.
I should not make use of it if I were you, but keep it secret, and keep it safe. Now, I'm going to bed.
As master of Bag End, Frodo felt it his painful duty to say goodbye to the guests. Rumours of strange events had by now spread all over the field, but Frodo would only say, "No doubt everything will be cleared up in the morning." About midnight, carriages came for the important folk. One by one they rolled away, filled with full but very unsatisfied hobbits. Gardeners came by arrangement and removed in wheelbarrows those that had inadvertently remained behind. Night slowly passed. The sun rose. The hobbits rose rather later. Morning went on.
We will settle down
People
in
came and
Eredon.
began, by orders, to clear away the pavilions and the tables and the chairs and the spoons and knives and bottles and plates and the lanterns and the flowering shrubs and boxes and the crumbs and cracker paper, the forgotten bags and gloves and handkerchiefs and the uneaten food,
Eredor has not been
a
settled.
very small item. Then a number of other people
The one
came
that passed
without
through that
orders,
is
Bagginses and Boffins and
actually
Bolgers and
the
Tukes and other guests
good
that
day.
lived or were staying near. By midday, when even the best fed were out and about again, there was a large crowd at Bag End, uninvited but not unexpected. Frodo was waiting on the step, smiling, but looking rather tired and worried. He welcomed all the callers, but he had not much more to say than before. His reply to all inquiries was simply this: Mr. Bilbo Baggins has gone away, as far as I know, for good. Some of the visitors he invited to come inside as Bilbo had left messages for them. Inside, in the hall, there was piled a large assortment of packages and parcels and small articles of furniture. On every item there was a label tied. There were several labels of this sort. For Adelard Tuke, for his very own, from Bilbo, on an umbrella. Adelard had carried off many unlabelled ones. For Dora Baggins, in memory of a long correspondence, with hope from Bilbo, on a large waste-paper basket. Dora was Drogo's sister and the eldest surviving female relative of Bilbo and Frodo. She was 99, and had written reams of good advice for more than half a century. For Milo Burrows, hoping it would be useful, from BB. On a gold pen and ink bottle. Milo never answered letters. For Angelica's use, from Uncle Bilbo. On a round convex mirror. She was a young Baggins, and too obviously considered her face shapely. For the collection of Hugo Brace Girdle, from a contributor. On an empty bookcase. Hugo was a great borrower of books, and worse than usual at returning them. For Lobelia Sackville Baggins, as a present, on a case of silver spoons. Bilbo believed that she had acquired a good many of his spoons while he was away on his former journey. Lobelia knew that quite well. When she arrived later in the day, she took the point at once. But she also took the spoons. This is only a small selection of the assembled presents. Bilbo's residence had got rather cluttered up with things in the house in the course of his long life. It was a tendency of hobbit homes to get cluttered up, for which the custom of giving so many birthday presents was largely responsible. Not, of course, that the birthday presents were always new. There were one or two old mathams of forgotten uses that had circulated all around the district. But Bilbo had usually given new presents, and kept those that he received.
I have no.
The old hole was now being cleared a little. Every one of the various parting gifts had labels, written out personally by Bilbo, and several had some point, or some joke. But of course most of the things were given where they would be wanted and welcome. The poorer hobbits, and especially those of Backshot Row, did very well. Old Gaffer Gamgee got 2 sacks of potatoes, a new spade, a woolen waistcoat, and a bottle of ointment for creaking joints. Old Rory Brandybuck, in return for much hospitality, got a dozen bottles of Old Wynyards, a strong red wine from the South Farthing, and now quite mature, as it had been laid down by Bilbo's father. Rory quite forgave Bilbo and voted him a capital fellow after the first bottle. There was plenty of everything left for Frodo, and, of course, all the chief treasures, as well as the books, pictures, and more than enough furniture, were left in his possession. There was, however, no sign nor mention of money or jewellery. Not a penny piece or a glass bead was given away. Frodo had a very trying time that afternoon. A false rumour that the whole household was being distributed free spread like wildfire, and before long the place was packed with people who had no business there, but could not be kept out. Labels got torn off and mixed, and quarrels broke out. Some people tried to do swaps and deals in the hole, and others tried to make off with minor items not addressed to them, or with anything that seemed unwanted or unwatched. The road to the gate was blocked with barrows and handcarts. In the middle of the commotion, the Sackville Bagginses arrived. Frodo had retired for a while and left his friend Merry Brandybuck to keep an eye on things. When Otho loudly demanded to see Frodo, Merry bowed politely. "He is indisposed," he said. "He is resting."
Hiding, you mean?
Said Lobelia.
Anyway, we want to see him, and we mean to see him. Just go and tell him so.
Merry left them a long while in the hall, and they had time to discover their parting gift of spoons.
Now in Eredor.
It did not improve their tempers. Eventually they were shown into the study.
It's another part of
Frodo was
Eredor
sitting at the
where
table
it's
with a lot of papers in front of
I
him.
mean, there's
He looked indisposed, to see the Sackville Bagginses at any rate,
doesn't say.
and he stood
But
up,
this is
fidgeting with something in his
Eredor
pocket.
on there.
But he spoke quite
But it's a
politely.
very
The
specific
Sackville
place in
Bagginses were
Eredor.
rather
I
offensive.
do
They
want to
began by
sell.
offering him bad bargain prices, as between friends, for various valuable and unlabeled things. When Frodo replied that the only things especially directed by Bilbo were being given away, they said the whole affair was very fishy.
Only one thing is clear to me,
Said Otho.
and that is that you're doing exceedingly well out of it. I insist on seeing the will.
Otho would have been Bilbo's heir, but for the adoption of Frodo. He read the will carefully and snorted. It was, unfortunately, very clear and correct. According to the legal customs of hobbits, which demand, among other things, several signatures of witnesses in red ink.
But when night comes, down the bad
Foiled
comes
again.
out.
He said to his wife.
And after waiting 60 years, spoons, fiddlesticks.
He snapped his fingers under Frodo's nose and stumped off. But Lobelia was not so easily got rid of. A little later, Frodo came out of the study to see how things were going on and found her still about the place, investigating nooks and corners and tapping the floors. He escorted her firmly off the premises after he had relieved her of several small, but rather valuable, articles that had somehow fallen inside her umbrella. Her face looked as if she was in the throes of thinking out a really crushing parting remark. But all she found to say, turning round on the step, was,
You'll live to regret it, young fellow. Why didn't you go too? You don't belong here, you're no Backins. You're a brandybuck. Did you hear that, Mary? That was an insult, if you like.
said Frodo as he shut the door on her.
Okay, that wasn't funny.
Oh, it was a compliment, said Merry Brandybuck. And so, of course, not true. When they went round the hole and evicted 3 young hobbits, 2 boffins and a bolger, who were knocking holes in the walls of one of the cellars, Frodo also had a tussle with young Sancho Proudfoot, old Odo Proudfoot's grandson, who had begun an excavation in the larger pantry, where he thought there was an echo.
I
The
have no
legend of
idea how
Bilbo's
YouTube
gold
gonna
excited
react to me
both
having
curiosity and hope.
audiobooks to play at the
For
same
legendary
time, but
gold, mysteriously
Well,
obtained if
I
not
do technically have
positively
permission.
ill-gotten, is, as everyone knows,
I mean, I have the one
anyone's
that
for the
made it.
finding,
Okay, not
unless the
J.R.R.
search is
Tolkien,
interrupted.
but the person that made
When he
this
had overcome
audiobook,
Sancho and pushed him
because
out,
he
Frodo
did
collapsed
make
on a
it
chair
very
in
well.
the hole.
Whew. It's time
And
to
I mean,
close up
it's
shop,
over
Mary.
10 years
he said.
old.
Lock
The
the door
audiobooks
and don't
are
open
just
it to
about
anyone
10
today.
years, because it's
Not even if they bring a
20
battering ram.
23 now, which means
Then he went to revive himself with a
it
belated
was
cup of tea.
exactly 10 years ago, because it was made in
He had
13.
hardly sat down when there came a soft knock at the front door.
Lobelia again, most likely, he thought. She must have thought of something really nasty and have come back again to say it. It can wait.
He went on with his tea. The knock was repeated, much louder. But he took no notice. Suddenly the wizard's head appeared at the window.
If you don't let me in, Frodo, I shall blow your door right down your hole and out through the hill.
He said,
My dear Gandalf, have a minute.
cried Frodo, running out of the room to the door.
Oh, come in, come in. I thought it was Lobelia.
Ah, then I forgive you. But I saw her some time ago, driving a pony trap towards Bywater with a face that would have curdled new milk.
She had nearly curdled me, honestly. I nearly tried on Bilbo's ring. I longed to disappear.
Don't do that.
Said Gandalf, sitting down.
Do be careful of that ring, Frodo. In fact, it is partly about that I have come to say a last word.
Well, what
We
about
have
it?
a long time to go before we get to Riverville.
What do you know already?
Oh, only what Bilbo told me. I have heard his story, how he found it and how he used it. On his journey, I mean.
Which story, I wonder?
Said Gandalf.
Oh, not what he told the dwarves and put in his book.
Midday,
Said
and
Frodo.
I know that
He told me the
for a
true
fact
story
that
soon after I came
daytime
to live
and
here.
nighttime in Minecraft
He said
is
you had
20
pestered him
minutes
till he told you.
each.
So I had better know too.
So you had like
No
20
secrets between
minutes
us, Frodo,
to
he
start
said,
a new
but they are not
world
to go any
actually get to
further.
a safe
It's
place
mine
if
anyway.
you want to
That's interesting,
survive the
Said
night.
Gandalf.
Well,
Which is
did
just
you think
enough
of it all?
time for me to actually
If you
set
mean
up a
inventing all
home.
that about a
is
present,
enough.
well,
And
I
if
thought
I'm
the
lucky
true
that
story
there are
much more
sheep
likely,
nearby that
and I
have
couldn't
to
see the point of altering it at all.
have to transport.
very unlike Bilbo to do so
actually
anyway.
have a safe place by the first night.
I thought it rather odd.
So did I. But odd things may happen to people that have such treasures, if they use them. Let it be a warning to you to be very careful with it. It may have other powers than just making you vanish when you wish to.
I don't understand.
Said Frodo.
Neither do I.
answered the wizard.
I have merely begun to wonder about the ring, especially since last night. No need to worry, but if you take my advice, you will use it very seldom, or not at all. At least I beg you not to use it in any way that will cause talk or rouse suspicion. I say again, keep it safe.
I do want
And keep it secret.
You're very mysterious. What are you afraid of?
I'm not
There's only torches
certain,
there.
so I will say no more.
Lanterns.
I may be able to tell you something when I come back. I'm going off at once, so this is goodbye for the present.
He got up.
I'm starting fighting.
At once?
Cried Frodo.
Whatever
Why,
I
I thought
find.
you were staying on for at least a week. I was looking forward to your help.
It's
I
gonna-
did mean to,
I'm
but I
gonna
have had to change my
automatically get,
mind. I may be
started
away
with
for a
the
good
old-
while, but I'll come and see you again as soon as I can. Expect me when you see me. I shall slip in quietly. I shan't
I
often
think
be
I'm
visited the
gonna
Shire
go with
openly
the
again. I find that I have become
thing
rather
that I
unpopular.
came from
They say
Greyhaven.
that I'm a nuisance and disturber of the peace. Some people are actually accusing me of spiriting Bilbo away. Or worse.
People in
If you want to know,
Lothlorien,
there is supposed to be a
of
plot
my
between
family
you
line.
and me to get hold of
But-
his wealth.
Oh, some
we did
people.
came from
Exclaimed
the
Frodo.
other place.
You mean Uther and Lobelia? How abominable.
Because
I would give them Bag End and
we
everything
came
else if I could
on a
get
ship
Bilbo
to
back and go
Greyhaven,
off tramping in the
and
country with
right
him.
now we're traveling to
love the
Rivendell, so
Shire.
then I try to get to Lothlorien.
But I begin to wish somehow I had gone too. I wonder if I shall ever see him again.
So do I,
Said Gandalf.
and I wonder many other
That takes
things.
a long time.
Goodbye now. Take care of yourself. Look out for me, especially at
My
unlikely
cat is
times.
screaming at me again.
Goodbye.
I think he's annoyed that I'm not
Frodo
sleeping
saw him
right
out the
now.
door. He gave a final
Well,
wave of
he's
his
annoyed
hand
that I'm not
and
sleeping.
walked off at a
most of
surprising
the time.
pace. But Frodo thought the old wizard looked unusually bent,
Right, give me a moment.
almost as if he was carrying a great weight.
Yeah, I can give you a
The
little bit
evening
of
was
candy.
closing in, and his cloaked figure quickly vanished
That
into the
was-
twilight. Frodo did not see him again for a long time.
Yeah, I will shut him up for at least a few hours, hopefully. I think that was chapter 1. Now chapter 2.
The talk did not die down in 9 or even 99 days. The second disappearance of Mr. Bilbo Baggins was discussed in Hobbiton and indeed all over the Shire, for a year and a day, and
Okay,
it was
I'm gonna
remembered
check,
much longer than that.
The difference
It became a
between these
fireside story
Right.
for young hobbits,
Oh,
and
that's
eventually
right.
Mad
That's on our
Baggins,
break.
who used to vanish with a bang and a flash and reappear with bags of jewels and gold, became a favourite character of legend and lived on long after all the true events
Hey,
were forgotten.
where are you going?
But in the meantime,
horse.
the general
Not going
opinion
anywhere.
in the neighbourhood was that Bilbo,
Oh,
who had
why?
always been rather cracked, had at last gone quite mad and had run off into the blue. There, he had undoubtedly fallen into a pool or a river and
What's
come
about
to a
the
tragic
green man?
but hardly an untimely end.
The funny thing about this
The
mod
blame was
is
mostly
this.
laid on Gandalf.
They do actually
If only
have
that
a
dreaded wizard
sex.
will leave young Frodo alone. Perhaps he'll settle down
Well,
and
it's
grow
more
some hobbit
immersive,
sense, they
I
said.
suppose.
And to all appearance, the wizard did leave Frodo alone,
But-
and he did settle down.
Oh yeah,
But the growth of hobbit sense was not very noticeable.
Too.
Indeed, he at once
Wait,
began to carry
are there
on
orcs in
Bilbo's
Breeland?
reputation for
I don't
oddity.
know.
He refused to go into mourning, and the next year he gave a party in honour of Bilbo's 112th birthday, which he called Hundredweight Feast. But that was short of the mark, for 20 guests were invited, and there were several feasts at which it snowed food and rained drink, as hobbits say. Some people were rather shocked, but Frodo kept up the custom of giving Bilbo's
I'm gonna have
birthday
that
party
crafting table
year
here.
after year until they got used to it. He said that he did not think Bilbo was dead, but when they asked,
I want to have a
"Where is he
selection
then?"
Of,
he shrugged his
crafting tables.
shoulders. He lived alone, as Bilbo had done, but he had a
Yeah,
good
I'm
many
not added to the
friends,
game yet, but you
especially
can do
among the younger
missions.
hobbits.
Like,
mostly descendants of the
I
old
know
Duke,
for the
who
fact
had
in
as
the
children been fond of Bilbo and often in and out of Bag End.
Maybe it's 11.
Folco Boffin and
You
Fridigar
can
Bolger
actually
were two of these, but his
quest for
closest
it.
friends
You can talk to a
were Peregrine
hobbit that have
Took,
like a question mark or
usually
something
called
about
Pippin,
them,
and Merry
they might say,
Brandybuck.
get
real
100
name was
oaks
Meriadoc.
for me.
But that
Or
was
something
seldom
like that.
remembered. Frodo went tramping all over the Shire with them,
100 oak logs.
but more often he
So-
wandered by himself, and to the amazement of the sensible folk, he was sometimes seen far from
quest where
home,
they
walking in the
wanted
hills and woods under the
250
starlight.
oak logs.
Merry and Pippin suspected
But
that he visited
it will
elves
give
at
you
times,
standing.
as Bilbo had done. As
But
time went on,
there are
people
no
began
quests
to notice
in,
that
this
Frodo
version,
also showed signs
so-
of good preservation.
But I will upgrade to a new version when
Outwardly,
the time
he
comes.
retained the same appearance of a robust and energetic hobbit just out of his tweens. Some folk have all the luck, they said. But it was not until Frodo approached the usually more sober age of 50 that they began to think it queer. Frodo himself, after the first shock, found that being his own master and the Mr. Baggins of Bag End was rather pleasant. For some years he was quite happy and did not worry much about the future, but half unknown to himself, the regret that he had not gone with Bilbo was steadily
As you see,
growing.
now these are
He found
actually
himself
lit
wondering
up,
at
which means
times,
I can actually
especially in the
teleport
autumn,
directly to
about the
them
wild
by...
lands and strange
this.
visions of mountains that he had never
Press
seen
F to
came
pause
into his
rather, select the
dreams.
waypoint. Waypoint
He
wait
began
time
to
is
say to
30
himself,
seconds, which
"Perhaps
we
I
will
shall
not
cross the
do.
river
We will
myself
try
now."
to get to
To
every
which the other
place
half of his mind always
first.
replied,
If we get to every
"Not
place,
yet."
then we can TP to all the places.
So it went on, until his 40s were running out, and his 50th birthday was drawing near. 50 was a number that he felt was somehow significant, or ominous. It was at any rate at that age that adventure had suddenly befallen Bilbo. Frodo began to feel restless, and the old paths seemed too well trodden. He looked at maps and wondered what lay beyond their edges. Maps made in the Shire showed mostly white spaces beyond its borders. He took to wandering further afield and more often by himself, and Merry and his other friends watched him anxiously. Often he was seen walking and talking with the strange wayfarers that began at this time to appear in the Shire. There were rumours of strange things happening in the world outside, and as Gandalf had not at the time appeared or sent any message for several years, Frodo gathered all the news he could. Elves, who seldom walked in the Shire, could now be seen passing westward through the woods in the evening, passing and not returning. But they were leaving Middle-earth and were no longer concerned with its troubles. There were, however, dwarves on the road in unusual numbers. The ancient east-west road ran through the Shire to its end at the Grey
Now we have to
Havens,
start to worry.
and dwarves had always used it on their way to their mines in the Blue
I think
Mountains.
they actually do spawn over in this.
They were the
over
hobbits'
here
chief
somewhere.
source of news from distant parts, if they wanted any. As a rule, dwarves said little and hobbits asked no more. But now Frodo often met strange dwarves of far countries, seeking refuge in the west. They were troubled, and some spoke in whispers of the enemy and of the land of Mordor. That name the hobbits only knew in legends of the dark past, like a shadow in the background of their memories. But it was ominous and disquieting. It seemed that the evil power in Mirkwood had been driven out by the White Council only to reappear in greater strength in the old strongholds of Mordor. The Dark Tower had been rebuilt, it was said.
Normally.
From there the power was spreading far and wide, and away far east and south there were wars and growing fear. Orcs were multiplying again in the mountains. Trolls were abroad, no longer dull-witted, but cunning, and armed with dreadful weapons. And there were murmured hints of creatures more terrible than all these, but they had no name. Little of all this, of course, reached the ears of ordinary hobbits. But even the deafest and most stay-at-home began to hear queer tales, and those whose business took them to the borders saw strange things. The conversation in the Green Dragon at Bywater, one evening, in the spring of Frodo's 50th year, showed that even in the comfortable heart of the Shire, rumours had been heard, though most hobbits still laughed at them. Sam Gamgee was sitting in one corner near the fire, and opposite him was Ted Sandyman, the miller's son, and there were various other rustic hobbits listening to their talk. "Queer things you do here these days, to be sure," said Sam.
Fornost's actually going to be very interesting trying to
said
build.
Ted. "You do if you listen,
But
but I can hear fireside tales and children's stories at home if I want to." "No doubt you can,"
Right at
retorted
top.
Sam. "And I
It's
dare
also
say
gonna be
there's more
interesting to
truth
build.
in some of them than you reckon. Who invented the stories anyway? Take dragons now." "No, thank ye," said Ted. "I won't. I heard tell of them when I was a youngster, but there is no call to believe in them now. There's only one dragon in Bywater, and that's green," he said, getting a general laugh.
Hey, next.
"All right,"
What
said
the
Sam,
hell?
laughing with the rest.
But what about these tree men? These giants, as you might call them. They do say that one bigger than a tree was seen up away beyond the North Moors not long back. Who's they? My cousin Hal, for one.
East again.
He works for Mr. Buffin at Overhill. And goes up to the North Farthen for the hunting.
Hey,
He saw one. Says he did, perhaps.
I mean, if
Your
we
Al's
agree,
always saying he's seen things.
then we can
And maybe
guess
he's
that
seen
three
things that
would
ain't
be
there.
like
But this one was as big as an elm tree. And
this
walking.
kinda big.
Walking 7
I
yards
guess.
to a stride. If it was an inch, then I bet it wasn't an inch. What he saw was an elm tree. And like as not, but this one was walking, I tell you. And there ain't no elm tree on the North Moors. Then I can't have seen one,
said Ted. There was some laughing and clapping. The audience seemed to think that Ted had scored a point.
All the same, said Sam, you can't deny that others besides our Hellfast have seen queer folk crossing the Shire. Crossing it, mind you. There are more that are turned back at the borders. The Bounders have never been so busy before. And I've heard tell that elves are moving west. They do say that they're going to harbours. Out away beyond the White Towers, said Sam.
Sam waved his arm vaguely. Neither he nor any of them knew how far it was to the sea. Past the old towers, beyond the western borders of the Shire. But it was an old tradition, that away over there stood the grey havens, from which at times elven ships set sail, never to return.
They are sailing, sailing, sailing over the sea. They are going into the west and leaving us,
said Sam, half chanting the words, shaking his head
we had
sadly
14,000
and
now.
solemnly. But Ted laughed.
Well, that isn't anything new if you believe the old tales, and I don't see what it matters to me or you. Let them sail. But I warrant you haven't even seen them doing it, nor anyone else in the Shire.
Well, I don't know, said Sam thoughtfully. He believed he had once seen an elf in the woods, and still hoped to see more one day. Of all the legends that he had heard in his early years, such as fragments of tales and half-remembered stories about the elves as the hobbits knew, had always moved him most deeply.
There are some, even in these parts, as know the fair folk and get news of 'em, he said. There's Mr. Baggins now that I work for. He told me that they were sailing and he knows a bit about elves, and old Mr. Bilbo knew more. Many's the talk I had with him when I was a little lad. Oh, they're both cracked, said Ted. Leastways old Bilbo was cracked, and Frodo's cracking. If that's where you get your news from, you'll never want for moonshine. Well, friends, I'm off home. Your good health.
He drained his mug and went out noisily. Sam sat silent and said no more. He had a good deal to think about. For one thing, there was a lot to do in the Bag End garden, and he would have a busy day tomorrow, if the weather cleared. The grass was growing fast, but Sam had more on his mind than
I think
gardening.
actually having the audio
After a
book and
while,
then
he
uploading
sighed
this
and got up
clip
and
on
went out.
YouTube, I am actually
It was
challenging
early April,
fate.
and the sky was now
Nothing
clearing
might
after
actually remove
heavy
my channel
rain.
because I'm gonna
The sun
probably
was down,
dispute
and the
them
cool, pale
saying
evening
that
was
I'm not
quietly
allowed to use
fading
it.
into the night.
Because I got permission from the person that
He
made the
walked home
audiobook,
under the
and
early
audiobook
stars through
is
Hobbiton
very
and up the
much
hill, whistling softly
different
and
from
thoughtfully.
the original art.
It was just at this time that Gandalf reappeared after his long absence. For 3 years after the party he had been away. Then he paid Frodo a brief visit, and after taking a good look at him, he went off again. During the next year or two, he had turned up fairly often, coming unexpectedly after dusk, and going off without warning before sunrise. He would not discuss his own business and journeys, and seemed chiefly interested in the small news about Frodo's health and doings. Then suddenly, his visits had ceased. It was over 9 years since Frodo had seen or heard of him, and he had begun to think that the wizard would never return and had given up all interest in hobbits. But that evening, as Sam was walking home and twilight was fading, there came the once familiar tap on the study window. Frodo welcomed his old friend with surprise and great delight. They looked hard at each other.
Well, eh?
Said Gandalf.
You look the same as ever, Frodo.
So do you, Frodo replied. But secretly he thought that Gandalf looked older and more careworn. He pressed him for news of himself and of the wide world, and soon they were deep in talk, and they stayed up far into the night. Next morning, after a late breakfast, the wizard was sitting with Frodo by the open window of the study. A bright fire was on the hearth, but the sun was warm, and the wind was in the south.
They are not
Everything
completely
looked
black
fresh,
horses. I
and the
believe.
new green of spring was
Wait, they are.
shimmering in the fields and on the tips of the trees'
They're
fingers.
supposed to be only be
Gandalf was thinking of a spring,
brown,
nearly 80 years
white,
before, when Bilbo had run out of
gray,
Bag End
but
without a
not
handkerchief.
Entire black, because
His
the
hair was
entire
perhaps
black
whiter than it
horses
had
should
been
only
then,
be able to be
and his beard and
found
eyebrows were
closer to
perhaps
Mordor,
longer.
I believe.
And his face more lined with care and wisdom. But his eyes were as bright as ever, and he smoked and blew smoke rings with the same vigor and delight. He was smoking now in silence, for Frodo was sitting still, deep in thought. Even in the light of morning he felt the dark shadow of the tidings that Gandalf had brought.
Woke up.
At last he broke the silence.
Last night you began to tell me strange things about my ring, Gandalf, he said. And then you stopped, because you said that such matters were best left until daylight. Don't you think that you had better finish it now? You see, the ring is dangerous. Far more dangerous than I guess. In what way?
In many ways, answered the wizard. It is far more powerful than I ever dared to think at first. So powerful that in the end would utterly overcome anyone of mortal race who possessed it. It would possess him. In Eregion, long ago, many elven rings were made. Magic rings, as you call them. And they were, of course, of various kinds. Some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles. Yet still to my mind dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous. A mortal, Frodo, who keeps one of the great rings, does not die. But he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues, until at last every minute is weariness. And if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes, in the end, invisible permanently, and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yes, sooner or later. Later, if he is strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last.
Well, the
Sooner or
ring
later
does
the dark
actually
power will devour
give
him.
power
How terrifying!
fitting
Said
to
Frodo.
the person.
There was another
As
long silence.
hobbits gets invisible,
The sound of Sam Gamgee
because
cutting the
they
lawn came from
are-
the garden.
pretty good.
How long have you known this?
And when they become
Asked Frodo at
invisible,
length.
they even
And how much did
enhances
Bilbo
that
know?
ability.
Bilbo knew no more than he told you, I'm sure.
Said Gandalf.
As
He would
Gandalf
certainly
get
never
more
have passed
magical
on to
power
you
if
anything that he
used the
thought would be a
ring.
danger, even though I promised to look after you. He thought the ring was very beautiful and very useful
Will
at
not become
need.
invisible.
And if anything was wrong or queer, it was
One
himself.
ring gives
He said that
power
it was
equal
growing on his mind,
to the person.
and he was always worrying about it. But he did not suspect that the ring itself was to blame.
Though he had found out that the thing needed looking after, it did not seem always of the same size or weight. It shrank and expanded in an odd way, and might suddenly slip off a finger when it had been tight. Yes, he warned me of that in his last letter, said Frodo. So I have always kept it on its chain.
Very wise, said Gandalf.
Past the
But as for
Forsaken
his
Inn,
long life,
right?
Bilbo never connected it with the ring at
No,
all,
just
He took all the credit
it
for
would
that
be
to
right
himself.
here.
and he was very proud of it. Though he
If
was
I
getting
build the
restless and
Forsaken
uneasy,
Inn,
thin
I'm
and
probably gonna
stretched, he
build
said,
a
a sign
another
that the
ring
ring
then,
was
and then
getting
just
control.
beat it up.
How long
with
have you known
different
all
things.
this? Asked Frodo again.
No,
Make it look
said
pretty
Gandalf.
decrepit.
I have known
Of
much
the place
that
you
only the
would like
wise
to
know,
spend the night
Frodo.
if you have any
But
choice.
if you mean know about this ring, well, I still do not know, one might say. There is a last test to make, but I no longer doubt my guess. When did I first begin to guess? He mused, searching back in memory. Let me see. It was in the year that the
Yeah,
White Council
yeah.
drove the Dark Power from Mirkwood, just before the Battle of the Five Armies, that Bilbo found this ring,
I should
A
write
shadow
down
fell on
the
my heart
books
then,
any moment.
though I did not know yet what I feared. I wondered often how Gollum came by a great ring, as plainly it was. That at least was clear from the first. Then I heard Bilbo's strange story of how he had won it,
Yeah,
and I
that
could not
works.
believe it.
But they do
When I at
not
last got
attack
the
me
truth out
because
of
I
him,
have not
I saw at
sided
once that
with
he had been
faction
trying to put
just
his
yet.
claim on the ring beyond doubt,
And
much like Gollum
I'm
with
gonna
his
go with the
birthday
aspect
present.
that they can't actually see me.
The lies were too much alike for my comfort. Clearly the ring had an unwholesome power that set to work on his keeper at once. That was the first real warning I had that all was not well.
I told Bilbo often that such
Hello,
rings were
man.
better left unused, but he resented it, and soon got angry. There was little else I could do. I could not take it from him without doing greater
I
harm,
so much
and I had no
respect
right to
for
do
that.
so anyway. I could only watch and wait. I might perhaps have consulted Saruman the
Keep
White,
moving.
but
I
something
don't know
always
if the
held
wolves
me
would
back.
like to eat my horse,
Who is
and
he?
I don't want them
Asked
to eat my
Frodo.
horse.
I've never heard of him before.
Maybe not, answered Gandalf. Hobbits are, or were, no concern of his. Yet he is great among the wise. He is the chief of my order, and the head of the council. His knowledge is deep, but his pride has grown with it, and he takes ill any meddling. The lore of the Elven Rings, great and small, is his province. He has long studied it, seeking the lost secrets of their making. But when the rings were debated in the council, all that he would reveal to us of his ring lore told against my fears. So my doubts slept, but uneasily. Still I watched, and I waited, and all seemed well with Bilbo. And the years passed. Yes, they passed, and they seemed not to touch him. He showed no signs of age. The shadow fell on me again, but I said to myself, after all, he comes of a long-lived family on his mother's side. There is time yet. Wait. And I waited, until that night when he left his house. He said he did things then that filled me with a fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work, and I have spent most of the years since then in finding out the truth of it.
There wasn't any permanent harm done, was there? Asked Frodo anxiously. He would get all right in time, wouldn't he? Be able to rest in peace, I mean.
He felt better at once, said Gandalf. But there is only one power in this world that knows all about the rings and their effects, and as far as I know, there is no power in the world that knows all about hobbits. Among the wise, I am the only one that goes in for hobbit lore, an obscure branch of knowledge, but full of surprises. Soft as butter they can be, and yet sometimes as tough as old tree roots. I think it unlikely that some would resist the rings far longer than most of the wise would believe. I don't think you need to worry about Bilbo. Of course, he possessed the ring for many years and used it, so it might take a long while for the influence to
Stick
wear off,
around,
before it
or
was safe
too
for
long, they
him
will
to see
start
it
to
again,
notice me.
for instance.
But as long
Otherwise,
as
he
I
might
keep
live on for
moving
years,
and
quite
doesn't
happily.
linger,
Just stop as he
they
was when he
will
parted
not
with it.
notice me.
Or he gave it up at the end of his own accord.
It's
An
not like
important
having
point.
a power, but it's
No, I was
kind
not
of
troubled
some
about dear
emblematic.
Bilbo anymore. Once he had let the thing go, it is for you that I feel responsible.
What I'm going
Ever
with
since
is-
Bilbo left, I have been deeply concerned about you, and about all these charming, absurd, helpless
The funny thing
hobbits.
is now, the orcs,
It would be a grievous blow to
I
the world
thought
if the dark
they will
power
stop
overcame the
spawning
Shire.
in everywhere, but
If
they
all
will
your
not
kind,
catch
jolly,
fire
stupid
if they already
vultures,
are
hornblowers,
spawning.
boffins,
They will just
bracegirdles, and the
linger
rest,
around.
not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses
Of course,
became
To
He
the
unfastened it
right
and handed it slowly to the
place
wizard.
in Middle Earth.
It felt suddenly
No?
very heavy,
Fast.
as if either it or
Twice.
Frodo himself was in some way reluctant for Gandalf to touch it. Gandalf held it up. It looked to be made of pure and solid gold. Can you see any markings on it? He asked.
No, said Frodo. There are none. It's quite plain. And it never shows a scratch or sign of wear.
Well then, look. To Frodo's astonishment and distress, the wizard threw it suddenly into the middle of a glowing corner of the fire.
Frodo gave a cry and groped for the tongs, but Gandalf held him back.
Wait!
He said in a commanding voice, giving Frodo a quick look from under his bristling brows. No apparent change came over the ring. After a while, Gandalf got up, closed the shutters outside the window, and drew the curtains. The room became dark and silent, though the clack of Sam's shears, now nearer to the window, could still be heard faintly from the garden. For a moment the wizard stood looking at the fire. Then he stooped and removed the ring from the hearth with the tongs, and at once picked it up. Frodo gasped.
It's quite cool.
Said Gandalf. Take it. Frodo received it to his shrinking palm. It seemed to have become thicker and heavier than ever.
Hold it up,
Said Gandalf.
and look closely.
As Frodo did so, he now saw fine lines, finer than the finest pen strokes, running along the ring, outside and inside. Lines of fire that seemed to form the letters of a flowing script. They shone piercingly bright, and yet remote, as if out of a great depth.
If you're a traveler who travels far
I cannot read the fiery letters, said Frodo in a quavering voice.
No,
Trust me, I tried to walk this. It
But I
took me
can.
hours.
the letters are Elvish,
Get
of
to
an
where
ancient
I wanted
mode,
to go.
but the
That's why I have the
language is
horses.
that of
It's a
Mordor,
lot faster
which I
way
will
to
not
travel
hear.
over land.
But this in the common tongue is what it said, close enough. One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. It is only 2 lines of a verse long known in elven lore. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to
What was
die.
it? I can't remember
1
the full
for the Dark Lord and his dark throne in a land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all. 1 ring to find them. 1 ring to bring them all. And in the darkness
Okay,
bind them
what's
in the land of
wait, is
Mordor
this after last?
where the shadows lie.
He paused, and then said slowly with a
Flax.
deep voice.
Well, I do.
This
think we
is
need
the
to
master ring. The 1 ring to rule them all.
Need to figure out how
This is the
to
1 ring that he lost many ages ago,
grow it.
to the great weakening of his power. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it.
Wonder if it
Frodo
works
sat
that I can
silent and
attack
motionless.
villagers.
Fear seemed to stretch out a vast hand, up at the hilltops, or the leaves of the
I will
trees, or
try
the flowers opening in the
to
air.
create a
His
portal
head and his
at where we're
eyes were
gonna live,
down.
and I'm gonna go into the
Like a
overworld
dark
from
cloud
there,
rising in the
and
east and looming up
try
to
to grab
engulf
a
him.
few villagers and bring
This
them
ring,
into Middle
He
Earth,
stammered.
just to have a
How
little
on earth
bit
did it come
of
to
a
be?
way to live.
Ah, said Gandalf.
That is a very long story.
See if
The
I
beginnings
can
lie back in
set
the
up
Black
some
Years,
interesting things.
which only the lore masters now remember. If I were to tell you all that tale, we would still be sitting here when spring had passed into winter. But last night I told you of Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord. The rumors that you have heard are true. He has indeed arisen again and left his hold in Mirkwood, and returned to his ancient fastness in the Dark Tower of Mordor. That name even you hobbits have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories. Always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another
I
shape.
just started
and grows
a bit
again.
on the back. Why on the
I
back?
wish it need not have happened in my time.
Oh,
Said
and
Frodo.
it's,
So do
I
I,
will
said
start
Gandalf.
with 4 hours.
And so do all who lives to see
and
such
then I'm gonna take a
times.
break.
That is not for
eat
them
a
to
little
decide.
Bit, relax.
All we
and
have
then
to
I'm gonna
decide
be
is what
back
to do
again
with the time
to
that is
continue.
given us. And already, Frodo, our time is
And
beginning
I'm not
to
decided
look
yet
black.
how I'm gonna keep track of where
The
other
enemy is
countries
fast
are.
becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening. We shall be hard put to it.
I mean, I do
We shall
have
be very
the
hard
original
put to
files
it, even
left,
if it were not for this
and I
dreadful
do-
chance.
And the files I have right now.
The
that I'm
enemy
playing
still
is
lacks
not
one thing to
original,
give him strength and
which
knowledge to
means
beat
I
down
could
all
always
resistance.
Just delete
Break the last
files
defenses,
that
cover all the
are
lands in a
wrong.
second darkness. He lacks the one ring. The 3, fairest of
Oh
all,
yeah,
the elf
if you look at
lords
his
hid
son,
from
you
him,
can't see us.
and his hand never touched them or sullied them.
This?
7 the
Painful.
dwarf kings possessed, but 3 he has recovered, and the others the dragons have consumed.
It's a very immersive
9
looking
he
at
gave
this
to
son.
mortal men, proud and great, and so
That's
ensnared
what I
them.
have to get.
Long ago
Okay,
they
if I
fell
look
under the
there.
dominion of the One,
and they became ring wraiths.
Okay, I should not do that. If
Shadows
anyone actually
under his
watching
great
this,
shadow.
that would possibly be able to
His most
cause
terrible
seizures.
sins.
But
Long
it
ago.
should not be any problem. I mean,
It
I
is
can
many a year since the
watch
Nine walked
False
abroad yet.
Flashing
Who
Lights without
knows?
problem.
As the
I've
shadow
never
grows
had
once
any
more, they too may walk again. But
Any
come,
experience with seizures
we will
at
not speak
all.
of such things even in the morning of the Shire.
Okay, where?
So it is now.
Let's go.
The 9 he has gathered to
Lost
himself,
Bridge.
the 7 also,
That's where we're going.
or else they are destroyed. The 3 are hidden still, but that no longer troubles him,
Well,
He only
still
needs the
found it.
one.
Old Elven Way.
for he made that
maybe
ring
we
himself.
should have gone that.
It is his,
This
and
is
he
the
let a
old
great
Elven
part of
way,
his own
but
form of power
We're
pass
probably
into
gonna have
it.
enough travel
So that he
to
could
do
rule
in
all
Middle
the
Earth
others.
That they will
If he
not be
recovers
a
it,
problem.
then he will command them all again, wherever they may be, even the 3, and all that has been wrought with them will be laid
I
bare,
can say this.
and he will be
I think
stronger
this construct
than ever.
combination with the Lord of the Rings mod is a good
And this
thing
is
because
the dreadful
the
chance,
mining
Frodo.
is
He believed that the
hell.
one had perished.
Literally
that the
hell.
elves had destroyed it, and should have been done. But he knows now that it has not
I'm gonna
perished,
go and try
that
to
it has
find
been
Mithril.
found. So he is
Okay, I haven't
seeking it,
checked if Mithril actually
seeking it
is
all his thoughts is
implemented,
bent on it.
but it should be.
It is great hope, and our great
Okay.
fear.
Why wasn't it destroyed?
Cried Frodo.
And how did the enemy ever come to lose it if he was so strong and it was so precious to him?
I mean,
He clutched the ring in his
if
hand,
we just
as if he
go
saw
on.
already dark
Because I
fingers
have
stretching out to
this, but I
seize
would
it.
replace all
It
but
was
the
taken from
eagle
him,
wings
said Gandalf.
with the
strength of the elves to resist him was greater
Mithril,
long ago,
If I can find
And
it.
not all men were estranged from them. The men of
No, I'm gonna have
Westerness
to
came
go
to their
Lord
aid.
and, for enchanting.
That is a chapter of ancient history which might be good to recall. For there was sorrow in them too, and gathering dark, but great valor, and great deeds that were not wholly vain. One day, perhaps, I will tell you the tale, or you shall hear it told full by one who knows it best. But for the moment, since most of all you need to know is how this thing came to you, and that will be tale enough. This is all that I will say.
1 hour and 40 minutes, but still.
It was Gil-galad, the elven king, and Elendil of Westerness who overthrew Sauron, though they themselves perished in the deed. And Isildur, Elendil's son, cut the ring from Sauron's hand and took it for his own. Then Sauron was vanquished and his spirit fled, and was hidden for long years, until his shadow took shape again in Mirkwood. But the ring was lost. It fell into the great river Anduin and vanished. For Isildur was marching north along the east banks of the river, and near the Gladden fields he was waylaid by the orcs of the mountains, and almost all his folk were slain. He leaped into the waters, but the ring slipped from his finger as he swam, and then the orcs saw him and killed him with arrows. And there, in the dark pools amid the Gladden fields, he said, "The ring passed out of all knowledge, and even so much of its history is known only to a few, and the council of the wise could discover no more." But at last I can carry on with the story, I think. Long after, but still very long ago, there lived by the banks of the great river on the edge of Wilderland a clever-handed and quiet-footed little people. I guess they were of hobbit kind, akin to the fathers of the Stools. For they loved the river, and often swam in it, or made little boats of reeds. There was among them a family of high repute, for it was large and wealthier than most, and it was ruled by a grandmother of the folk. Stern and wise in old lore, such as they had. The most inquisitive and curious-minded of their family was called Smeagol. He was interested in roots and beginnings. He dived into deep pools. He burrowed under trees and growing plants. He tunneled into green mounds. And he ceased to look up at the hilltops or leaves on the trees or the flowers opening in the air. His head and his eyes were downward. He had a friend called Deagle, of similar sort, sharper-eyed but not so quick and strong. On a time they took a boat and went down to the Gladden fields, where there were great beds of iris and flowering reeds. There Smeagol got out and went nosing about the banks. But Deagle sat in the boat and fished. Suddenly a great fish took his hook.
and before he knew where he was dragged out and down into the water to the bottom. Then he let go of his line, for he thought that he saw something shining in the riverbed, and holding his breath he grabbed at it. Then up he came, spluttering, with weeds in his hair and a handful of mud, and he swam to the bank. And behold, when he washed the mud away, there in his hand lay a beautiful golden ring. And it shone and glittered in the sun, so that his heart was glad. But Smeagol had been watching him from behind a tree, and as Deagle gloated over the ring, Smeagol came softly up behind.
Give us that, Deagle, my love, said Smeagol over his friend's shoulder.
Why? Said Deagle.
Because it's my birthday, my love, and I want it,
said Smeagol.
I don't care,
said Deagle.
I have given you a present already. More than I could afford. I found this and I'm going to keep it.
And spiderwebs
Are you indeed, my love?
Said Smeagol, and he caught Deagle by the throat and strangled him, because the gold looked so bright and beautiful. Then he put the ring on his finger. No one ever found out what has become of Deagle. He was murdered far from home, and his body was cunningly hidden. But Smeagol returned alone, and he found that none of his family could see him when he was wearing the ring.
The sound actually get copyrighted.
He was very pleased with his discovery, and he concealed it, and he used it to find out secrets. And he put his knowledge to crooked and malicious uses. He became sharp-eyed and keen-eared for all that was hurtful. The ring had given him power according to his stature. It is not to be wondered at that he became very unpopular and was shunned, when visible, by all his relations. They kicked him, and he bit their feet. He took to thieving and going about muttering to himself and gurgling in his throat. So they called him Gollum and cursed him and told him to go far away. And his grandmother, desiring peace, expelled him from the family and turned him out of their home. He wandered in loneliness, weeping a little for the hardness of the world and the journey up the river, till he came to a stream that flowed down from the mountains, and he went that way. He caught fish in deep pools with invisible fingers and ate them raw. One day it was very hot, and as he was bending over the pool, he felt a burning on the back of his head, and a dazzling light from the water pained his wet eyes. He wondered at it, for he had almost forgotten about the sun. And then for the last time he looked up and shook his fist at her. But as he lowered his eyes, he saw far above the tops of the misty mountains, out of which the steam came. And he thought suddenly, it would be cool and shady under those mountains. The sun could not watch me there. The roots of those mountains must be roots indeed. There must be great secrets buried there which have not been discovered since the beginning. So he journeyed by night up into the highlands, and he found a little cave out of which the dark stream ran. And he wormed his way like a maggot into the heart of the hills, and vanished out of all knowledge. The ring went into the shadows with him, and even the Maker, when his power had begun to grow again, could learn nothing of it.
Gollum! Cried Frodo. You mean that this is the very Gollum creature that Bilbo met?
No, this is not the
How
lost
loathsome!
treasure.
I think it is a sad story, said the wizard, and it might have happened to others, even to some hobbits that I have known.
I can't believe that Gollum was connected with hobbits, however distantly, said Frodo with some heat. What an abominable notion!
It is true all the same, replied Gandalf. About their origins at any rate. I know more than hobbits do themselves, and even Bilbo's story suggests the kinship. There was a great deal in the background of their minds and memories that was very similar. They understood one another remarkably well,
Very much better than a hobbit would understand, say, a dwarf, or an orc, or even an elf. Think of the riddles they both knew, for one thing.
Yes, said Frodo. Though other folks besides hobbits ask riddles, and much of the same sort. And hobbits don't cheat. Gollum meant to cheat all the time. He was just trying to put poor Bilbo off his guard. And I dare say it amused his wickedness to start a game which might end in providing him with an easy victim, but if he lost would not hurt him.
Only too true, I fear, said Gandalf. But there was something else in it, I think, which you do not see yet. Even Gollum was not wholly ruined. He had proved tougher than even more one of the wise could have suggested, as a hobbit might. There was a little corner of his mind that was still his own, and light came through it. As through a chink in the dark, light out of the past. It was actually pleasant, I think, to hear her kindly voice again, bringing up memories of wind and trees, and the sun on the grass, and such forgotten things. But that, of course, would only make the evil part of him angry in the end, unless it could be conquered, unless it could be cured. Gandalf sighed. Alas, there is little hope of that for him. Yet not no hope. No, not though he possessed the ring so long, almost as far back as he can remember, for it was long since he had worn it much. In the black darkness it was seldom needed. Certainly he had never faded. He is thin and tough still, but the thing was eating up his mind, of course, and the torment had been almost unbearable. All the great secrets under the mountains had turned out to be just empty night. There was nothing more to find out, nothing worth doing, only nasty furtive eating and resentful remembering. He was altogether wretched. He hated the dark, and he hated light more. He hated everything, and the ring most of all.
What do you mean? Said Frodo.
11.
Surely the ring was his precious, and the only thing he cared for. But if he hated it, why did he get rid of it? Or go away and leave it?
You ought to begin to understand, Frodo, after all you've heard,
Take
said
that.
Gandalf. He hated it and loved it, as he hated and loved himself. He could not get rid of it. He had no will left in the matter. A ring of power looks after itself, Frodo. It may slip off treacherously, but its keeper never abandons it. At most, he plays with the idea of handing it to someone else's care, and that only at an early stage, when it first begins to grip. But as far as I know, Bilbo alone in history has ever gone beyond playing and really done it. He needed all my help too, and even so he would never have just forsaken it or cast it aside. It was not Gollum, Frodo, but the ring itself that decided things. The ring left
I'm pressing
him.
the button now to eat the carrots.
What, just
I
in
can't
time to
eat
meet Bilbo?
And
said
because
Frodo.
I have not
Wouldn't an
spent
orc
my
have suited
own
it better?
And the horse
It is no laughing
does
matter,
not have
said
an
Gandalf.
energy
Not for you.
hunger bar.
It was the strangest event in the whole history of the ring so far. Bilbo's arrival just at that time, and putting his hand on it, blindly, in the dark. There was more than one power at work, Frodo. The ring was trying to get back to its master. It had slipped from Isildur's hand and betrayed him. Then, when chance came, it caught poor Deagol, and he was murdered. And after that, Gollum, and it had devoured him. It could make no further use of him. He was too small and mean, and as long as it stayed with him, he would never leave his deep pool again. So now, when its master was awake once more and sending out his dark thought through Mirkwood, it abandoned Gollum,
closer to Rivendell now.
only to be picked up by the most unlikely
We'll head
person
south.
imaginable. Bilbo from the Shire. Behind that there was something else at work, beyond any design of the ring-maker. I can put it no plainer than by saying that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and not by its maker. In which case you were also meant to have it. And that may be an encouraging thought.
It is not, said Frodo. Though I am not sure that I understand you. But how have you learned all this about the ring and about Gollum? Do you really know it all, or are you just guessing still? Gandalf looked at Frodo, and his eyes glinted.
I knew much, and I have learned much, he answered. But I'm not going to give you an account of all my doings to you. The history of Elendil and Isildur and the One Ring is known to all the wise,
Your ring is shown to be that one ring by the fire writing alone, apart from any other evidence.
And when did you discover that?
Asked Frodo, interrupting. Just now in this room, of course, answered the wizard sharply. But I expected to find it. I have come back from dark journeys and long search to make that final test. It is the last proof, and all is now only too clear. Making out Gollum's part and fitting it into the gap in the history required some thought. I may have started with guesses about Gollum, but I am not guessing now. I know. I've seen him.
You've seen Gollum? Exclaimed Frodo in amazement.
Yes. The obvious thing to do, of course, if one could. I tried long ago, but I have managed it at last.
Then what happened after Bilbo escaped from him? Do you know that?
Not so clearly. What I have told you is what Gollum was willing to tell. Though not, of course, in the way I have reported it. Gollum is a liar.
I would not be
And
surprised
you have to
if
sift
when
his
I get to
words.
Rivendell, it's
For instance, he
nighttime
called the
and
ring his
raining.
birthday present. And he stuck to that.
I mean, it would be
He said
fitting
it
with the
came from
story
his
I find
grandmother,
great.
who had lots of beautiful things of that kind. A ridiculous story, but I have no doubt that Smeagol's grandmother was a matriarch, a great person in her way, but to talk of her possessing many elven rings was absurd. And as for giving them away, it was a lie, but a lie with a grain of truth. The murder of Deagol haunted Gollum, and he had made up a defence, repeating it to his precious over and over again, as he gnawed bones in the dark, until he almost believed it.
I can use the
It
spear
was his
when
birthday.
riding the horse.
Deagol ought to have given it the ring to him. It had previously
So
turned
I
up
am,
just so as to
geared
be a
up
present.
for-
It was his birthday present, and so on and so on.
I can even try to mine, but I
I
don't want
enjoyed
to
it
do
as long
that.
as I could, but the
I don't want
truth
to
was
destroy her.
desperately important. In the end,
Those
I had
are
to be
those people
harsh.
that need a lot
I
of
put the fear of
faith,
fire
will probably take
and
the
wrung
road,
the true story
but,
out of
I
it,
mean,
bit
you would need to
by bit,
replace it with something else.
together
to
with
keep
much
the
snivelling and snarling. He thought he was
loose.
misunderstood,
In the
nearly
long,
used.
run, it's
But when he
better
had
to
at last
create
told me his
everything
story
yourself.
as far as the end of the riddle game and Bilbo's escape, he would not say any more, except in dark hints. Some other fear was on him greater than mine. He muttered that he was going to get his own back. People would see if he would stand being kicked and driven into a hole, and then robbed. Gollum had good friends now. Good friends, and very strong. They would help him. Baggins would pay for it. That was his chief thought. He hated Bilbo and cursed his name. What is more, he knew where he came from.
But how did he find that out?
Said Frodo. Well, as for the name, Bilbo very foolishly told Gollum himself, and after that it would not be difficult to discover his country once Gollum came out. Oh yes, he came out. His longing for the ring proved stronger than his fear of the orcs, or even the light. After a year or two he left the mountains. You see, though still bound by desire of it, the ring was no longer devouring him. He began to revive a little. He felt old, terribly old, yet less timid. And he was mortally hungry. Light of sun and moon he still feared and hated, and he always will, I think. But he was cunning.
Protect me from being
He found he
noticed by
could
the
hide
orcs.
from daylight and moonshine, and make his way swiftly and softly by dead of night with his pale, cold eyes, and catch small, frightened or unwary things. He grew stronger and
Funny
bolder,
thing is that
with new food and new air.
He's not the first
He
dog
found
lord.
his way
He's
into
actually the second
Mirkwood,
one.
as one would expect.
Is that where you
I
found
don't
him?
remember what the
Asked
first
Frodo.
one was called.
I saw
right
him
now.
there, asked Gandalf, but before that he had wandered far, following Bilbo's trail. It was difficult to learn anything from him for certain, for his talk was constantly interrupted by curses and threats.
What has it got in its pockets?
He said,
You wouldn't say so, precious little shit. Not a fair question. It cheated first, it did. It broke the rules. We would have squeezed it less precious than we were precious.
that is a sample of his talk. I don't suppose you want any more. I had weary days of it.
But
But
that's a
from
lot
him
of them.
swapped among the snarls, I even gathered that his padding feet had taken him at last to Esgaroth,
Well,
and
that's
even
an
to
orc
the
riding
streets
a
of
wolf.
Dale, listening secretly and peering. Well,
Those
the
are
news
like
of the great
wolves
events
that
went
are
far and
archers.
wide
Those
over the
are the
land,
most
and many had
annoying
heard
ones to
Bilbo's
have to
name
deal with.
and knew where he came from. He had made no secret out of our return journey to his home in the west.
Archers
Gollum's
are
sharp
annoying
ears
to
would
deal
soon
with no
learn what
matter
he
what.
wanted.
Then why
Well, we
didn't he
have a
track
good
Bilbo
elven bow,
further?
at least.
Asked Frodo.
Why didn't he come to the Shire?
Ah, said Gandalf. Now we come to
I
it.
haven't named it.
I think Gollum tried
pickaxe
to.
Or the axe.
He set
Yeah, I
out and
suppose
came
this
back
is the
westward,
last bridge.
as far as the Great River.
Yeah, it is.
But then he turned aside. He was not daunted by the distance, I'm sure. No, something else drew him that way. So my friends think. Those that hunted him for me. The Wood Elves tracked him first. An easy task for them. For his trail was still fresh then.
Well, the bridge is built, so
They
we
may
don't
have put
have to
him back
build the
at
bridge
London,
at the least.
though they never caught him. The wood was full of the rumour of him. Dreadful
Oh, crap.
tales, even among beasts and birds. The woodman said that there was some new terror abroad, a ghost that drank blood.
We have
It
to get
climbed trees
good
to find
bit
nests,
along
and
the
crept
road
into
before we
homes
can
to
turn
find the
down
young.
to get to Rivendell.
It slipped through windows to find cradles.
I don't know going to
But at the
Rivendell
western gate
right
of
now.
Mirkwood the trail turned away. It wandered off southwards and passed out of the Wood Elves' ken, and was lost. And then I made a great mistake. Yes, Frodo, not the first, though I fear it may prove the worst. I let the matter be. I let him go, for I had much else to think of at that time, and I still trusted the Lord of Saruman. Well, that was years ago. I have paid for his sins with many dark and dangerous days. The trail was long and cold when I took it up again, after Bilbo left here, and my search would have been in vain, but for the help that I had from a friend, Aragorn, the greatest traveller and huntsman of this age of the world. Together we sought for Gollum, down the whole length of Wilderland, without hope and without success. But at last, when I had given up the chase and turned to other parts, Gollum was found. My friend returned out of great perils, bringing the miserable creature with him. What he had been doing he would not say. He only wept and called us cruel, with many a Gollum in his throat. And when we pressed him, he whined and cringed and rubbed his long hands, licking his fingers as if they pained him, as if he remembered some old torture. But I'm afraid there is no possible doubt. He had made his slow, sneaking way, step by step, mile by mile south, down at last, into the land of Mordor.
Ranger.
A heavy silence fell in the room. Frodo could hear his heart beating. Even outside, everything seemed still.
No sound of Sam's shears could be heard.
Yes, to Mordor, said Gandalf. Alas, Mordor draws all wicked things, and the Dark Power was bending all its will to gather them there. The ring of the enemy would leave its mark too, leave him open to the summons. And all folk were whispering then of the new shadow in the south, and its hatred of the west. There were his fine new friends, who would help him in his
There
revenge.
reached 2 hours.
Wretched fool. In that land he would learn much. Too much for his comfort.
I think that's best part to stop it. And I will end the first episode here. So that's all I had for Minecraft Lord of the Rings mod this time. So hit like and share. See you next time. Bye bye.